Serenaded by the village band, the happy couple Rocky and Piao are about to say their vows, and it wouldn't be a Chinese wedding without fireworks. But in a rapidly changing China, even marriage faces its challenges.
There are women who, by the time they get to be 26 or 27, and this has been going on now for at least 10 or 15 years, are labeled left behind, as though they are no longer wanted.
Love, sex and marriage are part of today's story, but it's really about half the sky. Mao said that's what women hold up, giving them an equal place in the revolution, intending to overturn centuries of oppression. But what has it really been like for women in the last 70 years?
One of the hangovers from the one-child policy was it was known that there was a lot of femicide. And so there's now a situation in China where there are millions more men than women. They're of an age now where, because there is this excess of men, they simply can't meet a partner.
The Shanghai Old Jazz Band welcome you to Happy Birthday China. Or is it? Happy, that is. The People's Republic's 70 is a mere fragment of China's much vaunted 3,000 years of civilization. Still, the pace of change in one human lifetime has been dizzying, and the country is now hurtling into a future where it is the world's coming economic and political superpower. I've long been fascinated by China since studying the revolution as a student. I remember the shock of seeing a newspaper billboard announcing the death of Mao and wondering where China would head next. My interest has only grown. I made a documentary there about the relationship with the USA and became intrigued by Chinese sci-fi. We had hoped to be in China to talk to people about their memories and hopes on this critical anniversary, but sadly we were declined a visa. Still, we'll do our best. I'm more convinced than ever that understanding China is vital, as its past and present collide to shape all our futures. The China dream and its nightmares will remake the world. Today, half the sky.
The red emblem shows she is an organized member of the Little Red Soldiers. The girls working here all come from schools in Peking to help the peasants at harvest time. And this is what education in China is aiming at. That people work together to get the best results for everyone.
It was a revolution indeed. Pictures of both sexes clad in identical Mao suits of women soldiers and factory workers surprised some in the West. But in China itself, the new laws allowing women to divorce, forbidding forced marriage and concubines, laws making sure girls went to school, overturned the centuries-old presumption of female inferiority. But perhaps for women then and now, the burden is more than half the sky.
听众朋友您好，我是欣然，欣然张开了眼。
That's Xin Ran, remembering how she used to introduce her radio show Words on the Night Breeze, which began broadcasting in 1989.
Very interesting period of China. Everybody thought we just had to open up to the world and also to open the door to ourselves. I was given long list what I couldn't talk. Guardian and BBC all on the top. Christmas and Easter was forbidden as well.
Feelings weren't forbidden, not exactly.
When I talk about my son, I said, I love my boy. He's half years old. Then the audience sent a letter to me saying, how dare you say love? That is a capital word.
A capitalist word, love.
Yes, I was really shocked.
More shocks were to follow, unpleasant ones. Asking listeners to tell their stories, she opened a floodgate.
More than 85 or maybe 90% letters come from women. All kind of problem, and the most is about family violence, sexual abuse.
One particularly terrible story Xin Ran investigated was that of a teenage girl, legs crushed in an earthquake, gang raped as she lay on the ground waiting for emergency treatment. The radio station's answering machines filled up with horrific stories of rape, brutality, and more mundane stories of broken lives.
When they had a chance to come to the city, they had no idea what that means, human rights or women's rights. You know, they grew up in the countryside. So this is why so many Chinese women commit suicide after 1990s. According to United Nations, Chinese women commit suicide is number 1 in the world from 1991, 95. I understand that because when they left the countryside, they come to the city, then the feeling being educated, or they start to feel the pain. They realize they killed their own daughter for the family trees, for the traditional beliefs. Before, they thought just part of the housework. They come to the city, they realize life could be very different for their daughters, but their daughter had no right to live.
Even as China changes at a dizzying pace, ancient attitudes can grip tight. Kerry Allen, who monitors Chinese social media for the BBC, says Me Too came to China, but the male-dominated Communist Party didn't like it.
Chinese people were going under the radar and using characters that sounded like Me Too. And it was known as the rice rabbit movement because mi fan, is rice, tuzi is rabbit, Me Too. For a while, the government didn't realise this, that it was gaining a lot of momentum. There were accusations of people in senior positions in universities and people in positions of power.
Despite the censorship, social media has given women the tools to fight back.
What would have been very unusual previously that you've got now is if a man inappropriately touched a woman on the subway, the woman wouldn't say anything maybe 10 years ago and she'd feel quite upset about it and she wouldn't be able to talk about it. But nowadays, women can shame these people online with their phones. It feels like there's much more recognition that women have rights and they have voices now and they can collectively shame people who are inappropriate towards them, either behind closed doors related to domestic violence or out in the street.
But of course, there is joy too. Let's go on a journey to a wedding.
West Virginia, Blue Ridge Mountains, Shenandoah River.
I was driving a couple of guys back home for Chinese New Year, and one of them, his name's Rocky. He was about to get married, and he was just playing music on his phone, and he chose Country Roads by John Denver, which is very popular in China, and we all got to singing along.
Take me home, country road.
Frank Langfit is an NPR correspondent and author of The Shanghai Free Taxi. When he was based in China, he cultivated contacts through an ingenious idea.
I had created a free taxi service in Shanghai to try to meet different sorts of people and basically hear the story of China as they saw it and allow them to frame it. So I met a bunch of different strangers. And then at a certain point, I decided to put an advertisement out on Weibo, the Chinese equivalent of Twitter, offering a ride home for Chinese New Year. And Rocky's one of the people who took me up on it.
The happy couple are greeted by a six-piece band dressed in PLA uniform, complete with trombone and tuba. Fireworks follow. Lots and lots of fireworks.
Rocky's family's home is up on a ridge, and his father and other people were lighting off tons of fireworks. And it's not like a normal fireworks display. It felt actually like an artillery barrage, and people, even the kids who were in the procession, the wedding procession, had to cover their eyes because there was all this confetti raining down from the sky.
Purple, red, pink and green confetti, and then a village dance troupe of aunts clad in red. The vows are over in a flash. An old custom takes longer.
So they're both trying to eat an apple right now that's held between them, which is nearly impossible. And they try, and it fell to the ground.
Some things may be common to weddings all around the world. The bridegroom's mum, Guo, becomes emotional. She's telling Frank of the hard times during the Cultural Revolution. As a child, bullied and forbidden to go to school. Frank says the real liberation for women was economic reform.
Once Mao was long gone and the economy began to change under Deng Xiaoping, who allowed farmers, to sell some of their products, Guo turned out to be a natural entrepreneur. And she ended up trying to raise money so that her kids would have an education that she hadn't had and basically been denied. Mao nearly destroyed the country twice. The Great Leap Forward ended up killing about 36 million people through a man-made famine. And then during the Cultural Revolution, about 1.5 million people were killed in sort of the political, basically that was Mao fighting against his political enemies. But if you look at someone like Guo, she only had a second-grade education, but I met her. She was incredibly bright and energetic, and you wonder, her life would have been so different if the Communist Party hadn't done these sorts of things.
For the next 30 years at least, all couples may only have one single child each. The Chinese have been very swift in implementing this policy throughout China. How do they stop second babies being born? What happens to the people who get pregnant and try to keep it secret?
Mao had always encouraged large families, but in 1979 the next leaders forbade parents from having more than one child. The one-child policy had huge and rather unexpected consequences.
So my mom had to hide her pregnancy.
Caroline Can was born the year Jin Ran's radio show began. She's the editor of China Dialogue, and she wouldn't be here now if the one-child policy had always been obeyed.
If the birth control offices, the officials, find somebody was pregnant, like so-called illegally, that means the third or second or third child, they try to push the woman to do a forced abortion. She had to hide in the farming field.
Once, her mum held a ring in her pocket to confuse the X-ray and persuade the doctor she was using birth control.
So my mom once used a very sneakily used a trick by putting a ring in a pocket and adjusted the position. You know, imagine...
Because they were looking to check that the diaphragm was in.
There was a
by
ring
the X-ray.
Yeah, exactly.
There was a choice for the parents of illegal children: pay a huge fine or simply never register their birth. There are an estimated 8 million people, now adults, who don't have official proper documents. They couldn't go to school, can't go to hospital, or even get a job. But the trouble for Caroline's mother didn't stop with her birth. She was rounded up for sterilization.
The women were treated basically like animals, but she managed to escape. She bring a letter with her, like saying, I'm not healthy, and if you insist on doing me the surgery, this is to the doctor, you have to sign, then you will be responsible for raising up my 2 children.
At the time of the one-child policy, most families wanted a boy. Many girls were simply killed. Femicide. But Jin Ran says the official end of the policy in 2015 has had huge consequences.
So even Chinese now, they say, if you have a daughter, you are rich. If you have a boy, you are poor.
The party is now worried by the drop in the birth rate and a decline in marriage. There's been a lot about left-behind women in their 30s who can't find a partner. Some do feel left on the shelf. But perhaps the real change is many others just don't see that as a problem. Caroline Can is 30 and still unmarried.
Something practical is the social welfare system is not as good as in the West. For example, my parents think if I don't get married, or they call it in time or early enough, or if I don't have children, the first question is who are going to take care of you when you get old.
Traditional attitudes are breaking down. Jin Ran says it leaves the older generation rather bewildered.
My friend called me and say, I don't understand today's life. My daughter is 19 and she's very proud. Tell me she changed the boyfriend again. Every week or every month changing one boyfriend. Then she become so popular in the university because now become very shameful if you don't have a girlfriend or boyfriend. I don't understand this generation. Even they have online lovers, sexual relations by computer.
So is it a happy birthday for the women of China, propping up more than their fair share of the firmament?
I mean, a lot of people smirk when you hear held up half the sky. It's a very patriarchal society and has been going back into imperial days and beyond. And you remember, obviously, foot binding and things like that. I think women did better under Mao, certainly than they had. And now a lot of the characters in my book are actually very independent women who have their own businesses and have their own professional lives.
It has been a long journey, these 70 years. Some of it familiar to many societies as they industrialise and modernise. But in China, the vast changes have been compressed in time, and critically both accelerated and sometimes diverted or resisted by the central commanding role of the government in the shape of the Communist Party.
Because of what's happening with the birth rate now, this recognition that women actually hold a lot of the cards and they should be put in positions of power. So women are increasingly finding a voice in China.